Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Karen Ottoni, Senior Director of Ecosystem and Strategic Initiatives at Hyperledger Foundation. I'm going to talk to you here today a little bit about open source software and open source communities and its potential to help the CBDC use case and the potential of the sector, what's being done, some examples, and then how to get involved. So if you're not familiar with Hyperledger Foundation, we are the open source global ecosystem for enterprise-grade blockchain technologies at the front and center of what's being done in production deployments in a variety of sectors around the world. We are a part of the umbrella of the Linux Foundation, which hosts open source projects in many different areas, many different technologies, and has been around for more than 20 years and really has established best practices in open source that Hyperledger leverages. We like to call ourselves a collaborative duocracy. If you haven't heard that term before, it means basically that the people who are involved are the ones who get to make decisions and take leadership positions in our community. That's really a foundation of open source at Linux Foundation and at Hyperledger as well. Our three pillars of our community are the foundation itself, so the nonprofit that's hosted by the Linux Foundation, our member organizations. So these are companies, institutions, associations that are leveraging our technology, participating in our community, contributing. And as a result, they become members in order to ensure that the sustainability of that code and those communities continue. We also then have the broader open source community. You don't have to be a member to use or participate. That contributes via various different leadership positions, which I'll touch on later, contributing code, etc. So not a lot of people realize this, but you already are using open source software all the time. You can see here in this Global Open Source Spotlight that Linux is the most widely used open source software. It's what the internet runs on. But of course, there's cloud, there's data management, there's Kubernetes. This is a part of our daily lives. Is it not open? Okay, I just see I'm looking back, so maybe it's not showing. Yeah, it's a little small, so maybe you can't read it. But I want to kind of give it a little bit of a tangible feeling. So if you have an iPhone, you can pull it out and see how even on something as proprietary as Apple, you are using open source. If you go to your settings and go to General, and then you scroll down to Legal and Regulatory, and then you click on Legal Notices, you'll see here, there's notices, and you can keep scrolling this for like almost 10 minutes, like it'll just go forever. These are open source software licenses that your iPhone is using. So it's trusted technology. It's something that's part of everything we already use and do. We have three main principles at Hyperledger Foundation because we believe that the future of decentralized technologies is one, open source, open development, and open governance. Let me define what those are and what we mean by that. So open source, very simply, public repository of code that anyone can use, evaluate, contribute to, and build on top of. Open development goes a little bit farther. So this is where the code now has a community that's actively building on top of it in the open. Then open governance takes that a little bit further, where the procedures, the roles for the community, the decisions made about the roadmap are also openly defined and managed. Hyperledger has been around for 8 years. We actually just celebrated our 8th year anniversary in a webinar you can find on our website. Had all the leaders of the space. Intellect.eu that just presented before me. They're actually one of the founding members of Hyperledger Foundation. And you can see that they were leveraging Fabric and Besu in that recent demo as well. We have 8 different graduated projects, 5 that are incubating, and many, many, many Hyperledger labs. This is a place for new code to be contributed that can be developed in the open, and a lot of groups. We have SIGs, we have regional chapters and working groups and meetups worldwide. So this is the community that we are fostering that's contributing and leveraging our code. Our technologies are being used in a variety of sectors for all different kinds of use cases. But of course, relevant to the topic here today is financial services. Our member community is what helps make the foundation possible. So we have premier members, general members as well, and these offer lots of different leadership opportunities within our community. So these are companies that are building products and services using Hyperledger technologies and ensuring by becoming a member the sustainability of those communities and technologies that they're relying on. We have associate members, DEA is an associate member, a lot of central banks as well. Bank of Norway, have Lassie, who's going to be speaking with us later, from the Bank of Norway, Banque de France, etc. So we invite you to engage in every which way possible, and I'll talk more about that as well. So since 2015, Hyperledger has been building, shaping the enterprise blockchain market. We really are at the center of the enterprise-grade blockchain ecosystem, building different frameworks, tools, and libraries that support production-ready technologies and projects. But not all open source is created equal. This is sort of some definitions that I don't think a lot of people necessarily realize or think about, because open source is sort of like a general term, but I want to define these for you so you can better distinguish the difference between different kinds of open source projects. So there's dump and run, which is simply you publish your code. So you don't necessarily have updates that are made to it. You don't necessarily have a roadmap. Users have very little recourse. It's just something that was published publicly. Another type of open source is the benevolent dictator. So you have an organization or an individual, they open source the code. They may allow some contributions, but the ultimate authority on merging code and contributions is always with that benevolent organizations. They are the ones that approve it. Some contributors may come from outside, but maintainers are always from the benevolent organization. So often when you hear that someone has open sourced their code, it is often this benevolent dictator example. You can also open a company product. So this is where you just simply, it's similar to kind of dump and run. You may allow outside contributors or not. They'll follow some releases and best security practices. What we encourage, what we want to see more of in this space is openly governed open source. That's code that has transparent documentation, decentralized meritocratic governance. It's hosted under a third-party entity like the Linux Foundation or Hyperledger Foundation. That stewards sort of the IP and the trademark of that code. Anyone can join and contribute. There's a clear, most importantly, it's a clear and public process for leadership in this space, for becoming a maintainer, and no restrictions on payment or for that maintainership role. So anyone can become a maintainer as long as you do the work. That's the whole duocracy part. So a lot of the projects at Hyperledger and at Linux Foundation are openly governed. A lot of people come to me all the time saying, well, like, especially with government institutions, oh, but it's more safe, it's more secure. They both have their advantages and disadvantages, of course, depending on what you're trying to do. But neither can really be deemed inherently more secure, because security really depends on a lot of different factors, such as your development practices for open source, the community, the health of the community, the vendor support in there. If you have one company developing the software, you have basically a single point of failure. If that company stops doing that, you have to then find another way to do the infrastructure that you're doing. And at the Linux Foundation, we actually, about a year or two ago, started this Open SSF Foundation. So it's open source security foundation that's focusing on developing best practices for open source. So if that's something you're interested in, I encourage you to take a look at that project. As I was kind of looking up different examples of open source for public sector, I was pleased to find that actually here in Germany, you have a sovereign tech fund. This is a project initiative by the German government that supports digital sovereignty by maintaining open digital infrastructure. So they are maintaining different open source code projects. And so you can take a look at the website. It was very interesting to find that. I thought that was really relevant. In this World of Open Source Global Spotlight research paper, government is really seen to be one of the primary beneficiaries of investing in open source. So I really want to see, and this is part of what I'm doing and connecting with central banks, BIS, et cetera, is helping them engage in that more. There's a lot of examples already of public sector supporting different blockchain open source projects. So we have EBSI here in Europe. I'm sure many of you are familiar with EBSI. It's one of the first public blockchain services in Europe to create cross-border services for the administration of businesses, different ecosystems. We also have LACchain in Latin America. This is something that was started by the Inter-American Development Bank. It's actually, I think, the largest permission public blockchain out there. They haven't been able to find anyone who has more nodes. Alastria is another one based out of Spain. And then in Brazil, we have the Rede Blockchain Brasil, which is intended to work on citizen services and transparency and funding. If you're looking for a sort of star example of the public sector in working with open source and engaging in it, I want to highlight the government of British Columbia. They've done significant work, not just as a prolific user of open source, but they actually contribute. They're really seen as an open source innovator in this space. They heavily contribute to our two decentralized identity projects, Indy and Aries. They first started off with something called the Org Book, which was an example of essentially a registry of companies in British Columbia that you could independently verify, for example, like liquor licenses and things like that. And now they've also done a lot more in the identity space with this digital wallet. They really are innovating and an example of how when the public sector really starts to leverage and engage in open source, they really see a lot of success. So I encourage you to look at what they're doing. We have developed some materials back to sort of the CBDC focus here. We have an ebook on Hyperledger in action for CBDCs. So please take a look at that. You can scan that QR code. I encourage you to read it because it's, of course, there's lots of trackers out there like what the Atlantic Council maintains. This focuses just on the ones that are using Hyperledger technologies. I'll wait until you guys are scanning to.
It's too small.
Oh, is it too small? Okay. Well, let me just come and I'll send it to you. Come to me. It's also on our website. Some of the examples that you'll find in that ebook are the Central Bank of Brazil. They're using Hyperledger Besu for their DREX pilots. Banque de France has also used Fabric and Cacti, which is our interoperability tool, for their research. It's also part of the pilot regime experiments going on right now with the DL3S, I think it is. So they're currently experimenting with that. Swift is using Hyperledger Firefly. The Swift sandbox is pretty big. It's got 18 different central banks, lots of different financial institutions participating in that using Firefly, Quorum, and Corda together. And then Bank of Norway, as I touched on earlier, and you'll hear about later on today, used Hyperledger Besu. And I want to applaud Lassie and highlight that he was part of the team that actually contributed the code that they worked on for their experiment to GitHub, an open source set. This is, I believe, the first of its kind being done by central bank in this space. So we were really excited to see that. It's the kind of thing we want to see more of to encourage more open sharing and development. This is a map that you'll see in the ebook when you download it, and it shows of the different projects around the world. I keep this up to date. Hopefully it's accurate. It's got all the projects that are public that have announced which technology they're using. And on the side there, you'll see the various Hyperledger technologies that are being leveraged. So what we really are trying to do is making a case for there to be more open development as part of the CBDC research and experimentations happening around the world. Why? Because the power of a community will always outperform the power of any single individual or company. Transparency and openness is really key to this space because you're developing something new, and to really develop a trusted ecosystem. We believe that transparency and openness is the way to go about doing that, especially given some of the criticisms of CBDCs that you've seen out there. The value needs to move across different systems. And so making the technology infrastructure neutral and open makes interoperability more easy to figure out. And the result is you have more production-ready technology that's hardened, that's tested, that's been reviewed and evaluated to support mission-critical regulated systems. Why we believe that open source is the way for collaborative innovation is you drive this optionality, you have the vendor neutrality. So you, if you end up needing to switch vendors or someone goes out of business, you have other vendors that you can work with for that technology. There's a lot of operational efficiencies that you can achieve as well. Duplication of effort, avoiding that. We don't need to have 180 central banks working on their own CBDC. A lot of what's being developed is probably 80% of it very similar and can be shared and tested. And then what you need to have be closed or secret, you can do that. So you can devote more of your R&D into the differentiating part of your code rather than what's the base pretty standard code. What's developed openly is more likely also to become a common standard because you have more people using it, leveraging it, and so that can facilitate interoperability in this space as well. And the Apache license, which is what is used primarily at the Linux Foundation, protects any contributions that are made to the code as well. So with CBDC, the transparent part I think is fundamental. The public auditability of the code, the fact that the research that all these central banks are doing, these are public goods and really should be shared openly. You can argue that the security, the visibility of everything makes the bugs more easy to address, the vulnerabilities more easy to fix, and you have no single vendor that controls access or knowledge of the code. You benefit from community improvements, you have outside feedback, and you can assure that the software has been reviewed. And then you have that global collaboration for standard setting. So these standards can propagate without really direct engagement. They can become almost de facto just because people are using it more. Lower friction and prevent duplication of effort, really. Some misconceptions. So I've touched on a little bit on this before with the security. So there's no evidence it's less secure. You can actually argue that it's more secure because you can fix the bugs more easily. A lot of critical software, like I said, that you already use, like SSH, which is the software that's used for when your administrator remote controls your computer. I'm sure everyone as a company has had that at some point when your computer stops working. That's open source. Browser engines are open source. So it's already being relied on for critical infrastructure in many of the things that companies and governments do already. Sometimes people talk about the provenance issue. We don't know who's building it. Again, a lot of you are already using this, but we actually do know who's building it. Most of the developers that are involved in building open source projects come from major companies, like the ones you saw in our member community, Linux contributors or Intel, Google Hat. We know who's building this code. It isn't really as much of a mystery as you think. And then you don't have to open source everything. Like I said, you can just open source what's sort of at the base infrastructure that's shareable, that helps move the use case further, and whatever you don't want to, or is your differentiating factor, you can keep that close to yourself. Some of the challenges are who decides. So I've talked about the bureaucracy aspect. The maintainers, the ones who are involved, ultimately are the ones who decide what happens with the code. So there's funding sustainability for every open source project. That can sometimes be a challenge. And generally, even though there are, threat actors, generally it's outweighed by code quality improvements and catching bugs early and often. So open sourcing software can really increase rigor, transparency, improve collaboration, and it's something that we are trying to encourage participants in the CBDCs to use and do. An example of this is Open CBDC. This is developed by MIT along with the Federal Reserve of Boston. They contributed openly the code that they developed. It was been used and reviewed by a lot of the G7 central banks or economies, and is a good example of what we want to see more of, sharing openly so that others can review, test, evaluate, and leverage it. In Hyperledger, this is a timeline of their various projects that have been contributed to our community. Not all of these are necessarily used in the CBDC space, but it's kind of helpful to see the evolution of our open source projects. Get a chance to. You're welcome to have the slides if you want, just email me. I'm not going to go deep into each of these. I'm just going to highlight a couple things. You can find all this information on our website, but Hyperledger Basis was mentioned earlier. It's being used a lot in financial services space. I wanted to highlight here that something that's coming soon, that we'll be announcing soon, is a Basis for Financial Services working group. This is a group that will have a lot of participation from the private sector. Lots of big banks are getting involved to help influence the Basis roadmap to make it the features more relevant for financial services applications. So if that's something you're interested in and want to get involved in, again, anyone can get involved. Please let me know. Come talk to me. Hyperledger Cacti is an interoperability tool. If you're interested in interoperability, I highly recommend you look at Hyperledger Cacti. Hyperledger Firefly is another one that's the one I mentioned earlier, being used by Swift and also in Brazil as well. What I want to touch on with Hyperledger Firefly, they're open source supernode, but they have this slide that shows exactly what I was explaining earlier. See all these like yellow squares here that you used to have to build yourself. All of that was open source, and as part of Hyperledger Firefly, you can now leverage that. You can now focus your resources on the business applications. So this is a real visual of how you concentrate your R&D efforts, where you actually differentiate and leverage open source technology where you don't. So why should you get involved in our community, become a member, participate, use our code? You can accelerate the time to market for your project because, again, you're not spending all the time building everything in those yellow squares. As a developer, you gain significant experience. You can talk about the work that you're doing because it is open. You make sure that the technology that you're building on top of stays active by getting involved in using it, drive adoption to your products, tap into this broad global community for resources, for help with your work. And we also have a very healthy vendor ecosystem as well if you need more assistance with services or products. And you can help by being involved, the bureaucracy, shape the direction of these projects. If you want to connect with our community, we're on Discord. All these projects have Discord channels. You can go there, ask questions, talk to the maintainers directly, get help. So I encourage you to join our Discord. And ultimately, open source software is a two-way street. You got to contribute back to the communities to ensure that the technologies you're building on continue to be viable and sustainable. So please come talk to me. I want to hear about what you're doing, what you're interested in, or roadblocks you've had to using Hyperledger technology or getting involved in our community. I look forward to speaking with you and seeing you at our future events or seeing you online at our various communities. Thank you so much.